All right, evening everyone. How's everybody doing? Head nods for people still awake? All right, well, like Dr. Fitzhugh said, my name is Grayson Campbell, and I am a dual enrolled student both here at Gulf Coast and at Covenant Christian School. Now, this whole project you're about to see was originally for science fair, but through my association with Dr. Fitzhugh, I was lucky enough to be able to present it in many different venues. And my project was Murder on the Milkweed, and it's a research study on Asclepias curassavica, or the tropical milkweed. Now, tropical milkweed is the hobbyist species that, as I'm sure you all know, most people like to plant. Monarchs, of course, cannot survive without milkweed. It is their plant. Their caterpillars only eat milkweed plants, so monarchs must have milkweed to lay their eggs upon. It's simple. You have one species for another species of butterfly, one species of plant. Now, just like many other butterfly enthusiasts and hobbyists, I have been growing tropical milkweed in my backyard for several years because I wanted to help save the monarchs by providing breeding habitats. And I was so lucky to have my mom and my dad who supported me by not plucking those plants or using Roundup as soon as they sprouted. Tropical milkweed is sold commercially at all local nurseries over the United States. You can practically find it anywhere you want to. It's inexpensive and easy to grow from seeds, and it thrives in dry, wet, and nutrient-rich or poor soils. Here in the Panhandle, tropical milkweed grows year-round. It is one of the hardiest plants you will ever see. Even when we had those freezes last year, it only took a couple of days before those plants started sprouting leaves again. Although tropical milkweed is native to South America, it has become widely popular in butterfly gardens. It comes in several varieties and is now common in most states. If you travel America, you'll be able to see tropical milkweed most anywhere if you look hard enough. Over the past 10 years, I have raised monarch caterpillars on the dozens of tropical milkweed plants I have in my backyard. I was kind of that, that ecology kid. I love milkweed. I love the monarchs. I would bring them into the kindergarten, the preschool, elementary class, go over the metamorphosis process. These are butterflies, and this is the stage they go from eggs to larva to pupa to adult, and try to engage them in the same thing I had a passion for. Over the years, I noticed a decline in monarchs and increases in predation. So this year I set out to determine if predation was one of the influencing factors in the monarch population decline. Now, predation, of course, if you're unfamiliar with that term, it means other animals taking out the monarch caterpillars, because the monarchs share the tropical milkweed and really all types of milkweed with a variety of different insect species, and some mammal species and reptile species even. Here in the Panhandle of Florida, monarchs are typically spotted in late summer and early fall as the monarchs make their way to Mexico to spend the winter. And we'll also see them come up sometimes in the spring as well. One of the most profound mysteries in the world, because nobody knows how it works really, is the yearly migration of the Danaus, Plexippus, known to most of us as the monarch butterflies, to Mexico to overwinter in oyamel firs. No one knows what drives or directs the monarchs east of the Rockies in Canada to migrate in Mexico the same time each year, but over 100 million of them make the formidable journey to survive in the more favorable conditions. Now, this is one of the main mysteries, scientists have, among like what causes hiccups. One of the ones up on that list is what drives the monarchs to migrate. And if you'll see on this map, they have quite a set migration route. Most of them come up from the north, across the north. The ones we have come through our area in the Panhandle generally come along the eastern seaboard, and some go to Miami, and but the majority go down to Mexico. Now, we see a lot more monarchs coming down to Mexico than we see going up, because they generally don't come through the Panhandle unless they're coming down along the seaboard. And here's a picture of the monarch settling in oyamel firs. I've never had the chance to experience, but I've heard if you have the chance, this is one of the most fantastic things in nature that you can observe. They're just everywhere on the trees. You go to these oyamel firs on the hilltops where they have them, and there's just literally hundreds of thousands congregated there. Okay, the population grew almost 70% since last year, from 34 million butterflies to occupying 0.67 hectares in 2014 to 56.5 million butterflies occupying 2.79 acres in 2015. But what I want you to see from this chart is that I'm sure you noticed the trend of the decline in monarch population. Now, we had a little bit of increase this past winter, but the numbers are still so low, they are of great concern. And many theories, scientists have been developing theories on why the population is so low as opposed to earlier years. And they largely attribute it to, herbicidal chemicals, spray the GMOs, which kills the monarch plants. That's one of the reasons they see that the population is going down so low. So in order to save monarchs, they're encouraging hobbyists like me and you to plant milkweed basically anywhere and everywhere. Now, the purpose of my study was to determine if the ecology of the tropical milkweed plant, which so many of us grow, plays an active role in the decline of migrating monarchs. My question was, what percentage of eggs will result in monarch butterflies on tropical milkweed without the intervention of humans? One major thing to outline in the study is that my family and I are largely organic in our gardening. We don't spray Roundup. We like to have organic plants if at all possible. And we are seeing practically how the milkweed in our area affected the migration. Now, this study applies, largely to Big County, but it also applies to other areas of the Panhandle and like environments across the country. According to Literary Review, on average, 10% of monarch eggs laid will result in adult monarchs. But my hypothesis was that due to the pervasiveness of predators, especially like fire ants and wasps and things more common to our area, it was predicted by me that less than 5% of eggs laid on tropical milkweed in my Northwest Florida backyard natural environment would result in adult monarchs. Now, to set up for this project, of course, it's kind of directed by the State Science and Engineering Fair that you have to list all your materials, and I had my materials. I had 68 plants, which, thank goodness, they weren't plucked up. Plastic tags for numbering the plants because I had to keep all of them straight. I had color tape for flagging stems, which I'd flag them if they had eggs that produced, and I'd flag them again if the eggs went into the larva stage. Permanent markers for marking, data collection sheets, magnifying glass, camera, all the other sciencey stuff. How I did this was, I planted the milkweed plants, of course, that's over the span of the last 10 years to where I had a sizable number to collect my observations from. And I tagged all the plants. I observed the plants daily for quite some time. Once the eggs were found, I wrote down the date laid and the location, checked for missing or predated eggs, and then documented all observation on data collection sheets. Basically, long story short, I went there and wrote down every single trend that I noticed on the milkweed. And I repeated these procedures during each wave of passing monarchs, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, was a very long time. And here's just some pictures of life on tropical milkweed. I was blessed to have my mom, who has a wide-angle lens and quite a nice camera, so I can actually get up close and observe life on the milkweed at a closer level. One of the things I found that fascinated me is the presence of the junk bug. Now, I had never known what the junk bug was before, but I researched it, and it's actually a lacewing larva that heaps carcasses of other dead insects on its back to kind of cloak itself. I had no idea. And here is, I'm sure this, if you have milkweed, you've seen these guys before, because those are the milkweed bugs, those little red and black plants. And of course, we have our Florida lizards that are oh so everywhere. And you have, general flies, wasps, bees, and what have you. And I also, wrote down all the guests we found on our milkweed. I even euthanated some of them, put them on sticks, did the whole, entomologist deal. And what we found everything, both friends and foes of the monarchs on my butterfly. And just to name a few, we found assassin bugs, which, they'll kill anything that moves, wasps, tachinid flies, spiders, ants, imported fire ants, which I hope that many of you know those fire ants are not native to the area. I think they're originally from Asia. Lacewing eggs and larvae, squirrel tree frogs, mosquitoes, flies, aphids, ladybugs, larvae, love bugs, lizards. There's a whole bunch of things that we can find on our milkweed. And here's some more pictures. Those are some lacewing eggs, which I've never seen them. They look like monarch eggs, basically on a stick, if you will. And those are some aphids and some other larvae, just to give you an idea of the things I found on my milkweed that, of course, weren't treated with anything. And with my mom's camera, we were able to kind of document some amazing things I'd never seen before. One of the things I'd never seen was ovipositing, which is when a female monarch lays her eggs on the plants. Now, how they do this, for protection of their young, they will actually lay their eggs on the undersides of the plants so they're not visible to predators who might be passing by. We were able to get close-ups of the eggs to see them during their different stage. Newly laid eggs were yellow, and you can actually see right here the little head of the caterpillar about to erupt from the egg. That's how you can tell if it has a black tip on the top. That's how you can tell that the egg's about to hatch. Now, here we have a predated egg. You can actually see something has ripped the egg open right there and kind of like sucked the juice out like a, insect smoothie. And here we have a newly hatched caterpillar. It's so newly hatched because, of course, after they're hatched, they go back and eat their eggs. But this one, bottom right corner, is newly hatched. It hasn't even eaten its egg out. It's fresh out. And during this study, for this year, and I've been watching these guys for several years, I noticed some really odd things that were really unique to this year of my study. The monarchs, first of all, came through very prematurely this year. They came in through around early August instead of late September or early October, as they usually do. There were only 85 eggs laid on all 68 plants, and every egg or caterpillar was predated. None of them made it to the pupation stage or the adult stage. Now, in mid-November, a wave of monarchs came through laying eggs again. I called this wave 2 because they came at separated enough times it was easy to notice the trends. In the more typical egg-laying number of previous years, 230 were laid and 21 of those eggs hatched before temperatures dropped below freezing, killing all the eggs and caterpillars. The cold temperatures caused the milkweed leaves to die and fall off, but the plants quickly produced new leaves. And I'm sure if you're keeping up with the weather trends of last year, which I know everybody here does, we had, to jog your memory, we had a few freezes last year. And if you have your own gardens, I'm sure you noticed that you either had to cover up your blankets or you had to dig their graves. And that freeze we had kind of finished off the monarchs that weren't predated. However, in December, and this has never happened before, in December, a third wave of monarchs came through and laid eggs on the leaves, which were only about half an inch in length. I don't know, this hasn't happened before, and it's very strange, one, that they would lay their eggs in December, and two, that they would lay them on milkweed leaves that are like this big. None of the 56 eggs that were laid in the third wave survived the freeze that followed. And just to kind of recap, we had a bunch of eggs laid, and none of them made it past the second instar of caterpillar stage, which is a relatively young caterpillar. None of them made it to the pupation stage, and none of them made it to the adult stage, which is very strange. The results of the study regarding the monarch butterfly were bothersome to me. Not only were the monarch migration patterns disturbed this year, additionally, the ecology of native milkweed in northwest Florida was found to encourage complete predation and extirpation of all 371 eggs laid along the migration route to Mexico. If they weren't predated by bugs, they were killed by the freezes we had. Not one adult butterfly resulted from the eggs laid on tropical milkweed. Moreover, none of the caterpillars that hatched made it past the second instar stage due to predation or freezing temperatures. Now, if you're unfamiliar with caterpillar instars. There are 4 of them, and they're each marked when the caterpillar molts its skin. So like I said earlier, the second instar is a relatively young, relatively small caterpillar, which is odd that none made it past this stage. It is obvious that with a survival rate of 0, that something's wrong in the environment of this plant and or the monarch's migration. Now, to help me with all this mystery and all this weird stuff we found this year, I contacted research professor of zoology Lincoln Brower regarding the 3 waves of monarchs passing through this area, and asked him questions about my discovery regarding the presence of tropical milkweed along the southern route. Through this study, I began to question whether we should even have tropical milkweed along this part of the southern migration route. Since the monarchs are supposed to be migrating and not mating with each other and laying eggs. Dr. Brower referred me to a newly published study. It was newly published this past winter by Miss Lisa Gross, which concludes that tropical milkweed promotes sexual maturity so that the butterflies mate, lay eggs, then die when they should be migrating. Basically, by planting this milkweed in our area, we are encouraging them to stop their migration, to mate, to lay eggs, and of course, then they die. And now how this study was conducted by Lisa Gross, she told me, what she did was she caged monarchs with certain types of milkweed when they're still in migration mode. And the only species of milkweed that they decided to lay eggs on were the tropical milkweed that most hobbyists use to plant to attract monarchs, which is very, very disturbing. Just some background on Dr. Brower. He describes himself as a student and admirer of the monarch. He probably knows more about monarchs than certainly me and probably anybody in the world. He studied monarchs for over 50 years. He has written so many scientific papers about monarchs that it takes 15 pages just to list their titles. Now, if you're interested in the study of monarchs, he's definitely your go-to guy. Dr. Brower was studying monarchs even before the overwintering colonies in Mexico were known to science. He conducted early research there, and he continues to do research in Mexico today. Now, just like me, he never gets sick of them, he once said. And his fascination with monarchs has driven his studies, just as mine has with this one. Now, this doesn't really pertain to my project, but I thought you guys might find it interesting. This is his famous barfing blue jay. Now, if your kids or grandkids have ever told you, what their textbook says about butterflies, they've probably cited this source somehow, because I know in my textbooks when I was going up through elementary school, they said the reason monarchs can survive in the wilderness is because they taste bitter. And why do they taste bitter? It's because they eat the leaves of all these milkweed, which have toxins that make them taste bitter. So he conducted this study, and this is a photo of a bird practically, vomiting up the monarchs because they don't taste good, they hurt their stomachs, and that's basically, what keeps them alive. Just found that interesting. Now, my hypothesis was proven, but of course, under 5% survived. That was my hypothesis. That was certainly true because, 0% of them survived. This study leads me to conclude that tropical milkweed is apparently dangerous to the survival of monarchs here in the Panhandle, where non-native fire ant is a major predator. The fire ant was everywhere. When I went out and checked my leaves, there would be entire plants covered. If they were near an anthill, they were most likely covered by fire ants. They were everywhere. It's dangerous for the survival of the monarchs here, where non-native fire ants, of course, are a major predator, along with many other insects and vertebrates. Spiders kill anything that moves. Wasps kill anything that moves. Assassin bugs, they'll kill monarchs, certainly. Early and late arrival of the monarchs here led their offspring to be completely predated or killed by freezing temperatures. Basically, it's a bad deal to plant this tropical milkweed here in the Panhandle. Because tropical milkweed grows year-round here, that's what makes it problematic for the monarch. It appears that non-native tropical milkweed needs to be eliminated from the southern migration route as it interrupts their migration. Tropical milkweed also appears to encourage predation. Now, additional studies are needed across the United States to determine the effect of tropical milkweed ecology on the monarch population. And one of the things I want to do to continue this study is to plant native milkweed to see how that affects their migration as opposed to this tropical milkweed. Now, I've tried this, but of course, native milkweed, if you've ever tried to grow it, you know that it's extremely hard to get. I had some plants that started to germinate, but they died, and then I tried to plant another one and they didn't even germinate. So it's a work in progress. Is tropical milkweed killing monarch butterflies? Well, of course, if you've listened at all to the study, you would probably agree, yes. It appears that this tropical milkweed is inhospitable to the monarch eggs and larvae here in the Panhandle. Although there is a push to plant milkweed to save monarchs, only a few websites are encouraging native milkweed. Now, this is important. In the Midwest, where they're scared about, milkweed dying off because the farmers are using Roundup on their GMO crops and killing monarch breeding grounds there, these societies are just pushing for a nationwide plantation of tropical milkweed. But it's very important to note that where you plant it, the effects of this plant, depending on where it's planted, could do more harm than good. As this point, tropical milkweed is so widespread that some have even labeled it a native species. Yes, I have gone on websites, and yes, they have listed tropical milkweed as native to our area. Not all, but I have read some misleading websites. Now, Florida has more than 20 native species of milkweed, but to date only 3 are rarely available in nurseries, and those are the butterfly milkweed, or Asclepias tuberosa, swamp milkweed, and because that has 2 different species, incarnata and perennis. Butterfly milkweed is by far the most widely available, but mature leaves are usually too coarse for the caterpillars and their earlier instar stages to eat. Monarch caterpillars on this plant will also often be eating flowers and not the leaves. Now, there is aquatic milkweed, and they like a wet condition that not all gardeners have available. I don't have a swamp in my backyard, so I can't plant this swamp milkweed. So we really need more diversity of native milkweed choices. I hope that future research will lead to increased availability and planting of native milkweed. Now, the Xerces Society is working along with other nonprofits and native plant growers to increase the supply of native milkweed available to gardeners and ecological restoration specialists. Native milkweed is harder to grow from seed and is not easily tissue propagated. It does not perform as well as the tropical milkweed. I'm just going to tell you it's not as hardy. It's harder to plant, but it's worth the effort. My future research plans are to compare tropical milkweed ecology to some of our native species, as I already told you. Oh, and back there are just a few pictures of the non-native. There's one picture on the left of the tropical milkweed, and then there's a species of native milkweed, which of course we need to plant. Meanwhile, say no to tropical milkweed and choose native species to sustain monarchs for the long term, the long haul. Sure, planting tropical milkweed, has that short-term effect of, oh, look at the butterflies. Oh, there are eggs on my plants. Oh, look, a chrysalis, But if we're really going to sustain the population on the long haul, we need to plant native species of milkweed. Ask growers for native milkweed for your backyard. Now, I've been to several different nurseries in our area, but I haven't been able to find any. So I ordered seeds from various places in Florida, but the seeds can take up to 3 months to germinate, and the germination rate is very slow and low. Some estimate around 10% or less. Now, butterfly milkweed, or the tuberosa species, is the most available of the native species and is suitable for use in many parts of Florida. However, it grows throughout the United States, so be sure to specify Florida native ecotype from a Florida grower. If the nursery cannot tell you the origin of the plants and seed source, ask them to order Florida native ecotype milkweed. Other Florida native milkweeds that you might find include swamp milkweed or the white or aquatic milkweed. So basically, don't inadvertently harm the monarchs. Now, this is a very interesting poster I found. What it's doing is it's taking the tropical milkweed, as you can tell by its red blooms, and labeling it as the butterfly milkweed. Now, these pushes, they're good intentions. They just want monarch to be grown, but you have to be very careful. And you have to check the sources out for yourself, or you'll be misled by this source, like this source was. Know what you are buying. It's very important for the survival of the monarch species to only plant native milkweeds. In summation, if we don't, we disrupt their migration pattern and they halt here in the panhandle. Any questions?